Hello and welcome to my show, where I'm today talking to Anthony Blake, whom I met through studying Gurdjieff. We both have a liking for Georgij Ivanovič Gurđijev, and we've been reading his books for many years. But Tony's been in this work for how many years, Tony?
Oh God, it's about 55, I suppose.
So you're well studied.
Yeah. You can define it by saying, what's the entry, you know, what's the mark of joining up, where's my joining up card, you know. Well, I sort of got involved about 55 years ago.
And how was that then? How did you hear about Gurdjieff?
Well, in my background, I was at school and with various friends in the sixth form, and some of us had a sort of existentialist orientation, and we were very philosophical. And I became, well, one time when I was about 16, you know, quite suicidal about the meaninglessness of everything, and did an equivalent to Pascal's wager, you know, either there is meaning, then it's pointless to kill yourself, or if there's not meaning, your choice to kill yourself or not has no meaning. So I might as well assume there is meaning and see if I can connect with it. See, that was a real, it sounds just like a little rabbiting going on in the head, but it made a big difference to me, honestly. But then at school we got, you know, into, well, eventually became into Camus and Sartre and all that existentialism, the meaninglessness of everything. And I came across what was then a very popular book, probably people today have largely forgotten it, and that was Colin Wilson's The Outsider.
One of my favourite books.
Oh,
yes, when I read that I felt like finally I found someone that understands.
Oh gosh, how old were you then?
Only about 5 years ago.
Well,
so I came to Colin Wilson quite late. So in my late 30s.
Gosh. Well, it hit me like a bomb, and of course I was fascinated by all these descriptions of the poets Hartcray and Rimbaud and the philosophers Wittgenstein and all the rest. But then comes on the Gurdjieff and Ouspensky, he says they were different, they knew something the other guys didn't know. So I got attracted to that idea, and
so that would made you look into him a bit more.
Good, and this is all so ordinary, so banal, going to the library, eventually finding Gurdjieff, and then finding Mr. Bennett, and finding Volume 1 of his dramatic universe, wondering about it all, then eventually coming across his book on Subud. Do you know anything about Subud?
I do, yes.
Okay.
But if you want to explain for the radio show.
The book was concerning Subud, and it was about his encounter with this method or practice from Indonesia, initiating with a chap called Pak Subu, which involved an act of submission and spontaneous manifestation, which made a very big impact on some people and was quite newsworthy at the time, and now again it's one of those things forgotten.
Hello, we're back after that quick phone call, and Tony was just telling us about Subud, and you first read a book by J.G. Bennett, which is John G. Bennett, just for listeners, so we know. We'll talk a bit more about him in a minute. So if you'd like to carry on about your Subud.
Subud. So that was a point of contact. I knew there was somebody alive in England connected with this mysterious stuff about Gurdjieff and so on. And also at the time when I was at university, I go into my local bookshop called George's, and they had a copy of his book, All and Everything there, which I could read because I couldn't afford to buy it, you see. So I did that for a while until a friend of mine gave me a copy for a Christmas present, and it just immediately hit me like a bomb with an immediate connection, because different people connect to different things, you know, and they were just like Shazam, you know, but this is the me, you know, I'm in this book, this is me, I recognize myself in it. So I had that, and so eventually I went, found out where Bennett was, and he's a place near Kingston upon Thames called Coombe Springs. It was called Coombe Springs because it had a spring house in the gardens which used to feed water to Hampton Court.
Oh, wow.
So it's a Tudor, a beautiful Tudor spring house, you see. And encountered him, and then I have a story about my first main encounter with him. But this was the connection. He, just something about his background very, very briefly. He was he was known as a polymath. He knew different languages, he knew mathematics and physics, history. He had this passionate interest in Eastern spiritual techniques, and so he's a Renaissance man, you see, so it was very attractive to me. And he, you know, like anybody else attempts to survive and make a living and all the rest, he was in military intelligence in Turkey, where he came across Gurdjieff. The other time he's going to join with Rudolf Steiner, but meeting Gurdjieff affected him so deeply that changed the course of his life. But then later on he was doing industrial research, and during the war fuel research, which was very, very important for the economy and all the rest of it. And after the war, all this place he had with laboratories he acquired, because he got out of the business through the device of, or making use of the fact one of his people was being accused of being a communist or something, but anyway he could detect from it and get these premises, and that became Coombe Springs. I don't know when you went to see something, I heard go on talking this story, just in, you would only hear my voice.
No, that's fine, you carry on. Because at Coombe Springs he started quite like a group, didn't he? But was it a Gurdjieff-based work group?
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, again, it's like backtrack to the 1920s, like 1924 or something. He'd been in Turkey at the end of the First World War in about 1919, 1920, and he'd had various experiences because he was very good at languages. He was involved in some of the meetings to do with the aftermath of the war, Versailles and so on, and so firsthand he was witnessing the egoism and short-sightedness and pettiness of the people controlling world affairs, and it shocked him to the core. But just before that, during the war, he had got wounded and had a major thing for him, an out-of-the-body experience, which convinced him of the reality of other worlds.
Oh wow! Okay.
So he had those two sides, you see, about his inner experience, but also seeing the world was mad. And he met Gurdjieff, and he felt there was somebody who was real about these things and didn't fantasize or anything like that.
And Gurdjieff himself says we live in a lunatic asylum, doesn't he?
That's right.
So it must have greatly appealed to Bennett.
Yes. Of course, many other people too, like H.G. Wells, he always said the Earth is the lunatic asylum of the solar system, and that kind of thing. So it's a quite widely shared belief. And so Gurdjieff himself, who'd got out of Russia, he'd entered Russia, actually quite a rich man, a millionaire and so on, married a woman from the court of the Tsar, and was having various plans to set up his institute to spread his ideas. And of course the Bolshevik Revolution blew up. First World War happened, lost all his money. Eventually had to escape with his people, and it's a tremendous adventure story going down south, a place called Essentuki, and then cross through Turkey into Germany. He might have settled in England, but the authorities in England were suspicious of him, wouldn't let him have a visa. So he ended up in France, and he set up this institute there. So, long story short, and Bennett, as the Prieure it was called, he went there for a period of a few months, and I see some, very, very strong, good passion between the two. But Bennett, with his own career and so on, and, it seems absurd looking back, and said to Gurdjieff, well, I got to sort out my affairs and earn some money, but I'll be back. And he didn't get back.
Yes, because I heard he was only there for one period. I thought Bennett had been there for quite a few years.
No, it's less than a year. But it was very extraordinary because I don't know why it's extraordinary. What I feel is extraordinary because he, in a way, would always have this chance to develop his own thing. They always acknowledged Gurdjieff as his ultimate authority. But anyway, then he did various things, had various adventures and commercial adventures and disasters and all the rest of it. He found Ouspensky, the main pupil of Gurdjieff, and became a follower of Ouspensky. But Bennett had that thing with following people. He would do it wholeheartedly, totally. But as he was confessed later on, he never actually did it totally. He would put all his energies into following somebody and obey them absolutely. But anyway, he got into trouble because during the war, Ouspensky went to America, and there were people around in London and so on who heard about Gurdjieff and wanted somebody to tell them about his ideas. So Bennett started doing this, and then Ouspensky turned nasty and said, "You shouldn't be doing that," you know, this kind of thing. So
well, he didn't like that, did he, Ouspensky? He stopped talking to quite a few people about that. I'm trying to remember if it was Walker's book. No, Nott's. One of Nott's books I've just finished reading, and he was saying the same thing. He'd been part of Ouspensky's group, and then when he was told he could not speak about Gurdjieff at all, or Beelzebubs Tales.
Oh, that's I
and
too,
it's quite sad,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
the most
yeah.
important parts of the work, and Ouspensky said don't discuss it, and that's why Nott and Ouspensky broke up as well, because Nott did speak about it and he got thrown out.
Well, that's the background story of which, I mean, it's just a basic human social political story. It always happens, that kind of thing. You get the authorities who are restrictive, and there's the renegades and all this sort of thing. But the upshot of it was that Bennett has got a lot more and more experience of exposition, and it became, I believe, one of the best expositors of the ideas. For a long time he'd gone on just having the experience of trying to make sense of these things for people around him, and learning as he went, so to speak. And he had, I don't know if he'd had at that time early copy of Beelzebub. Well, he would have heard it in Prieure, the first one, or some drafts of that, I'm not sure, because the first extant complete one was in 1931, which had been after he left the Prieure. So then he, in his own work, Bennett was looking how do I go on, how do I progress, and he went to America and talked to Madame Ouspensky, and Madame Ouspensky was quite independent of Mr. Ouspensky, and she's a lovely lady in her own right, and she really was fond of the movements and all that sort of things, and Bennett was thinking, about how do I get some guidance and all the rest, and she said, why don't you go and talk to Mr. Gurdjieff? He said, what? I thought he was dead. He wasn't dead.
Oh, perhaps he thought he died during the war or something, especially since he was in Paris. Right. Gurdjieff was based in Paris at this time.
There you are, and it hadn't got any news. It sounds bizarre now. So, he found out his address, and it was. Then he said it was crazy. The flat Gurdjieff was in was just 2 blocks away from where he'd given a lecture.
Oh no!
No idea,
Passing ships in the night.
Yeah, this world is weird. And so they had this reunion. This whole explosion happened then. As Bennett, as you said, in his peculiar position, just a few months' exposure, not being with him consistently, and sort of then, anyway, coming up and being the equal of Jeanne de Salzmann, who's been with Gurdjieff all the time. And then all these ambiguities and games were being played of who was in charge of what, in what area of the world and so on. But that was Mr. Bennett, and I have to go on talking, but just to say another part of Bennett's work, his own special work, his own special interest, was because he was so, in a sense, widely educated and also scientific, he wanted to make a bridge between modern Western science and Gurdjieff's ideas.
Oh, okay. Can you expand a bit on that?
Yeah, well, I think I can do it by referring to his ideas on dimensions, but it's quite approachable sort of ideas. We live in a world of space and time, and you have people coming around and talking about higher powers or inner realities of a special nature, and communication across time and all kinds of strange things and visitations from higher beings and whatever all that stuff is. And so he thought, well, let's to put it very crudely, let's enlarge our picture of the universe to accommodate this. So, and he added on some dimensions. He got these ideas, these dimensions from Ouspensky. Ouspensky had a six-dimensional view of the world, 3 of space and 3 of time. So Bennett got the idea from him, but he developed these and eventually managed to get a paper published in the Royal Society, you know, on 5 dimensions of geometry. And the point was really that he believed that this could be done and it would help the acceptance of Gurdjieff's ideas. But what happened in fact, of course, his own ideas on the geometry were marginalized because he wasn't really in the swim of mainstream science, and there were other avenues being explored. And because most of the people following Gurdjieff were not interested in mathematical approaches. So, but he always maintained that quest, because he thought they should be united, these 2 streams, whatever it was. And so when I met him, I was very much, I felt, you know, sympathetic to this kind of union of science and mysticism was integral to me. But as for with Bennett, you have this logical, empirical side, which you usually do not get in spiritual movements, which is based on belief and authority. But with Bennett, you could argue with him.
He was open to discussion and things.
Yes, he was. And he kept on changing his mind. You know, for most people this is a sin. For me it was the ultimate virtue. If a man cannot change his mind, he's not going on understanding, he's dead. You see. So, and I myself was involved in my own life, my career, and studying at Cambridge and how to get a job, and I was going to go to Australia to teach science in a university there, and then something happened in my family and I swore to my mother I wouldn't leave her, I wouldn't go leave the country, and so I was destitute and ended up at his place near London, Coombe Springs, as kitchen boy. I had £1 a week pocket money, and I was under the thumb of the dragon, Lily Herstenius, the chief cook.
Was there many people living there at that time?
Well, it was about 20 odd, and of course there was a period of great drama. Why? Because for 4 years Bennett had served the cause of Subud. Then he felt he had to go on, or to separate from it in some way. So there was this very painful disentangling process. And he was, for a time, living at Coombe Springs almost as somebody who lived in the lodge, so to speak, had no power or influence on what was happening whatsoever, because it was taken over by this other thing. Because there's a kind of politics which arises with spiritual movements. You've got to be careful of.
Yeah.
So I turned up there, and he was just separating, and then we had to re-establish his control of the institute and start new things. But it was what was good for me, or I felt it was a lovely time, because he hadn't done the movements, for example, for 4 years, nor any of the inner exercises, anything of that. So he started afresh.
And these are the movements that Gurdjieff used to teach.
Yes, that's clear.
Because Gurdjieff believed that movements came along with the reading as well as the intellectual way of thinking of things. Movements were just important. They were like sacred dances, weren't they?
Sacred dances, you know, with a lot of them with his own special music. But what was delightful for me, because I got into this current of learning, of not it all being worked out and handed down. It was being renewed. I remember Bennett had this Joan, she was his secretary, but she was one of these women who was absolutely tremendous at the movements, had this tremendous body memory and so on. And the two of them would be in front of you reconstructing these movements, because he hadn't not very many elaborate notes at that time and so on. And that had all happened even in the earlier stages, because they were doing the movements with the French groups, and then there was a fallout with the French groups, so they stopped sending their teachers of the movements to Bennett, and so on and so on. But I tried to give you the positive impression about all this, and then he would run psychological groups, and you could go and just observe it. You see, does this appeal to you? It was all very gentle and organic, and re-establishing this, and he kept people that could also practice the Subud thing as an inner exercise called the Latihan, and he saw that he was almost in this world like a research scientist. He was looking at these different methods, different ways as he came across them, and thinking, what is the wholeness? Now the basic argument with people is don't mix things up, because you get confused. Okay, that has some validity, but if you want to be whole, you've got to involve the whole of yourself, and usually any one source of methods is a bit one-sided in this. So he began to feel his way to this all-round approach, and Subud offered a radical alternative to Gurdjieff, because in the way of Gurdjieff there is an emphasis on effort.
Yes, you have to put the effort in.
Yes.
No laziness in Gurdjieff.
No.
You have to work hard.
But it had an even subtle side, because Bennett was Mr. Effort. He was ruthless, but particularly with himself. And there's a story recounted in the diaries which eventually Elizabeth, his wife, published, Idiots in Paris, where she describes Gurdjieff trying to persuade Gurdjieff trying to persuade Bennett not to work so hard.
Oh.
Yeah.
Maybe because he was throwing himself in too much.
Too much. He said, you know, you do. Because Bennett hardly listened to him. And he had to find out the hard way about this way of just of effort. Left out a whole dimension. In a way it's parallel to there's many enigmatic things in Gurdjieff's writings, especially about things like colour, and he said there was a positive spectrum and a negative spectrum. What people know as a negative spectrum, so there is a positive spectrum. As a sort of metaphor, analogy, because Bennett saw that he was in the negative spectrum. In fact, this effort was only one side, and it was like the dark side or the active side, and there was another side which was receptive, the right side. So, and then at the same time he entered the Catholic Church, and so he kept on upsetting people, you see. Upset the Gurdjieff people by joining Subud. I mean, there are other reasons he upset the Gurdjieff people. I can't name them all, they're innumerable. And then he turns around and joins the Catholic Church, you see. And then people are going, I thought this was about being beyond religion, you see, just spiritual. And they said, no. And it was extremely important for him, and I appreciate it. And in this short talk we can't really go into, but it was for him the connection with the truly supernatural, not the so-called, today there is a lot of vagueness and emotion in it. I mean, it's sloppy as hell today, but people, they get any kind of vague feeling, they call it spiritual. You see, they said no, that's distinguishing the spirit world and the spiritual world.
So he was kind of looking for the Christ feeling, the Christ line.
Yes, certainly, and he took it quite literally in a strong sense, because he had to go through this personal experience about the Eucharist, and this was the body of Christ. It wasn't simply a metaphor or anything like this. And how is that possible? It related to his whole background of understanding of dimensions and the nature of existence and all the rest of it, which, that was what he had in him, not other people had, so he couldn't really explain it to them. I thought I could understand what he was after. That it was the fact that he was, towards the end of his life, he came towards this. These things about work on oneself, whatever it is, as struggling with oneself, doing practices. Here was, in the end, he just said, well, this is a bit like marking time. It will never of itself do anything for you. None of that. It says the only thing that works are the supernatural energies. So that was his radical view, you see, which is not the general view.
Do you think he was trying to get in touch with supernatural beings?
He was in touch with.
He was, right.
Well, that was it. That was him. He was his change towards the end of his life, and under the demanding circumstances, because there were things to do which I can't say too much about what he felt was his own inner task, and he had this. There was duty, and there was his individual task, and these are not the same. But that of the supernatural, it was it affects me even now to speak about it. It was just
So we're not talking playing with magic here then, we're talking
No.
about he was doing, it would be like a meditation type of way of contacting.
not even the
Not-
meditation.
right.
Meditation is part of the receptive ways, and he did actually accommodate to meditation in his later life, and particularly through another of his influences, this wonderful Cambodian monk Bhante.
Bhante.
Yes, there was this short name known. He was known affectionately Bhante, which means like a monk or something like that, you see. And he eventually, he lived about age of 109, Bhante did. And became very popular with a lot of Bennett's people because he was a Buddhist, and he was a seam of compassion. He did healing, but Bennett embraced him, brought him in, and said, and adopted his methods of meditation. But that's meditation, you see. This is not like with Subud. For him, it was a very serious case. There's a document which is quite intense document about the theology of Subud. What is the source of this action? And he had to really establish it was not the Holy Ghost, but it was what he called eventually the great life force. It was a natural force, not a supernatural force. And then he had to establish why the supernatural force could be connected with the church, which is an existential construct, and all kinds of difficulties he was aware of. But he, in his later talks, indicated this this reality, and it was not of the kind to say, well, you do this, you get that. Anything like that, you do this, you get that. It's not supernatural.
Because all the results would be different every time, kind of
Well,
thing.
but also they would be dependent, and they can't be dependent on us doing anything. So that was became his story. He really went on trying to. He's a great educator, and to make stuff accessible to people. There was another establishment near Sherborne House where he eventually was, called Beshara, based on the teachings of Ibn Arabi. But he'd go over there and give the most marvelous talks about Sufism, you see, which he wouldn't give to the people in Sherborne, but also the people in Beshara hardly knew anything about what he was saying anyway. But he was sort of explaining it for them, so he could do that to them. And his multiple interests were religion. He was at one time very interested in the body, and he knew intimately people connected with Alexander technique and the Feldenkrais technique and the Idorov. He knew Idorov personally, and all these body practitioners, because the body would be sent, and he knew science, he knew history, and he kept on doing all of this. And he got into eventually to educational research.
For the government, or just for his own?
First of all, it was for a local educational authority in Middlesex. At the time it was different, organised now, to do curriculum reform. And we had some young scientists like me getting together, ISERC, we call it Integral Science Education Research Group. We get together and discuss some pattern curriculum, how to teach science and this kind of thing. And then soon after that period, as that died away, there was Sputnik, which alerted the American authorities, and they got hysterical about education and gave out federal money for improving education, which of course the big companies latched onto and stole, like Westinghouse and IBM, and we were involved in some of them because as advisors, because Bennett was, just a couple of us had invented a new kind of teaching machine and a method of understanding. I tell you, he was such a creative guy, and so we got involved with all of that. And he was, and the institute offered a number of called fellowships, and one was my friend Tony Hodgson, and then I was then appointed. And it was interesting for me because I was able to follow up an interest I had in small groups and discussion and dialogue, and that was the start of it for me. And I had a chance to go to some technical colleges and do experiments with students and so on. So this to say that side of it was very because Bennett himself was a kind of very socialist and a reformist. As you know, one time in his life he could have become a Labour MP, and typically because he was half aristocrat, his mother was from New England and very puritanical, and I've forgotten the nature of his father. But we got so used to him saving the world and producing great schemes of reform and so on, and it became a joke amongst us. He's got another scheme. Sometimes also we'd run away if we saw him coming.
In case he drags you in.
Absolutely.
But they must have been quite enticing in some ways, because he was so enthusiastic and quite charismatic. He must have just drew you in.
Yes. Oh yeah. That had she has this other side to it, like one of those remarkable colleagues who died last year, Henri Bortoft, who became quite renowned for his work on Goethe. He had to just quit from Bennett entirely because he couldn't develop his own understanding, because Bennett was so powerful, charismatic and overwhelming. He couldn't be free enough inside to develop his own thing. And this, one of the things that Gurdjieff did, you notice, which may belong to it, often people who were very kind of helpful to him and with him, he would send away.
Try and stop you being like a follower to him, wouldn't he?
And it was, in a sense, you could argue this for their own good, so they can go out and develop themselves. And even, you think, well, like de Hartmann, all these few years, the composer who worked with him on the music, just for a few intensive words, and Bennett said, and then Gurdjieff says, buzz off, after a very intensive 2 years. And what did he do? He got the inner connection. We went into a lot of film music, which my friend of mine, Jan Bloom, is trying to track down now. And developed his own music, which was quite different than the music he did with Gurdjieff. So he had his own life. And because de Hartmann was not as somebody, he was a friend of Kandinsky, completely avant-garde, and to some extent with Schoenberg. So these people around Gurdjieff were really able people. But going back to the educational research, and so we did that, and we constantly did. So I was brought up in this atmosphere, of discussion, of creativity, of projects. We weren't sitting around looking at our navels, we weren't kind of, it was all
investigation and questioning.
Yeah, it was a very active kind of thing. So for me afterwards, and I see people who didn't experience that, they just kind of like treading water, so to speak. So you've got to focus on something, you've got to create something. Otherwise, you can't. You talk about understanding the laws of the universe and so on, unless you've got a really challenging task, you never actually concretely discover anything about the laws of the universe, how things really work.
Because you feel like things are settled, so you're not really investigating it because you've never been taught to move forward anymore, just accept what there is. But the way you was brought up and the way Bennett was, and Gurdjieff, of course, was trying to make us think and look at ourselves, the world around us, and how to make it hopefully a better place.
Well, that's one's own individual conscience is very. Gurdjieff is very clear, and then this looking at the YouTube thing, Krishnamurti is very clear. This tendency to go and help other people is usually idiotism. complete self-deceptive nonsense.
But that's from a lot of religions, isn't it? That we have to be altruistic and help your neighbour, and when really we should help ourselves first.
That's it. Because Gurdjieff's great words for me were to be able. What is it to be able? I mean, for me, this is like the whole teaching. And you mean, do you have enough fuel? Do you have enough guts? Is your nervous system tuned up enough? You know, literally about nervous system. People think about having higher experiences, but they say your nervous system can't take it. Because one of the things you do about toughening up your nervous system, so if you have a higher experience, it doesn't knock you unconscious. I mean, it's literally true, you see. We would go after these higher experiences and say the last thing you actually want is to have them.
You have to be prepared for it, don't you? Both physically, mentally, and I suppose emotionally would be the other one.
Oh, then certainly emotions. Now then, well, that's going on to go to Gurdjieff, but it's very strong, the event we just had. I mean, tried to, with Margit and other, and Kern, the pianist, we made this total sort of three-brained event, you know, which was centered on music and the feelings. But this strong, very simple, very strong thing you cannot understand. You have your body, heart and mind together. And to do this, each of these has got to be awakened in its own special way, because people are not usually awake in their bodies, not awake in their feelings, not awake in their minds at all. You've got what Gurdjieff called spirit, you have to spiritualize them. And then they can, my favorite description, then they can get together and cooperate and be friends. Before, they're just defective mechanisms. They've got to awaken, and then you get this kind of spirit in them, which is a kind of spirit. And so you allow your feelings to feel, your thinkings to think, and your body to move. But this is a great advance.
Because a lot of the time we're thinking when we should be feeling, feeling when we should be thinking.
Yeah, and you know, Gurdjieff's model there, each one is trying to do each other's job, you know, and you throw in a sex center as well, and you've got bedlam. I mean, it's a mix-up, and so that's got to be settled. It seems a simple thing to let each be of its own nature, and it's been very significant for me because I'm passionately interested in dialogue, and I say it's got, you know, it's only possible between really independent people. It's not an in-group, everybody agreeing. But you know, you've got to be, it's only people who are their own people can actually talk together. Because they're not anxious to get an identity, you know, by belonging or joining and this kind of thing. So that's a lot about all that. And finally, I might say about with my relationship with Bennett, it was, you see, because obviously in some way my dominant mode is that of an intellectual, but then it comes a kind of critical faculty, which I often find very missing in people today. Because I adored Bennett, you know, but it doesn't mean I just drifted along with him, you know, and I was sort of separated from him. And it's nice little song, isn't it, from my your
little phone. There. Neither of us turned our phones off before we started this show. We're like, so bad.
Absolutely. So,
he was telling us about your relationship with Bennett.
Yeah, and this holding a part of memory. He went, broadcasting must know that he had this period when he was at Coombe Springs, and then lots of things happened. He became connected with a man called Idries Shah, who represented an aspect of the Naqshbandi order of Sufis, arrived on the scene claiming his people, whatever sense it was, were the source of Gurdjieff's ideas, and he stole them from them and so on. And Gurdjieff had I call a run around from Idries Shah, because Bennett would obey, would follow. You know, he had this, you see, ability.
Because did Idries Shah ever actually meet Gurdjieff then? It's something I was never sure of.
No.
So he didn't know him?
No. Not at all, but I mean, that's a whole other story, which is an unfulfilled story, of course, you know, how he got here. Also the fact that his father had been in England before him. That's why Shah's mother is a Scottish woman, and so obviously his father had been in Britain to do that before and laid the foundations for various things. But then when this whole drama, I mean, Bennett wrote the book, the textbook, The Dramatic Universe, but he acted it out, you know, kind of thing. He met these people, and it was major, like, and so he said, okay, Shah wants a place, I'll give him Coombe Springs. Because his whole estate was given to him.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah.
And then what did... so Shah was carrying on what Bennett was teaching, or just put his own thing over?
Totally his own thing, you see. So, I mean, this act by Bennett was an act of genius, madness, or whatever, because people came and going, how can you do this? Well, he went through, and it was, you know, it's part of, you know, this is connected with other traditions, and you see, nothing is like what it seems, you know, and there's a lot of strands in Sufism about destruction. So it happened there. He had this incredible jami, this 9-sided building based on the Enneagram, and you know, and some of this just painfully watched it being destroyed.
Because I was hoping you were talking a bit about the building. It was outside in the gardens, wasn't it? And
yes.
You all actually built it from hand together? Like
Well,
was it a 9-sided room? Oh, was
yeah,
it? Oh.
Before my time, but I did some of it later. Yes, it was based on. And incidentally, about that, if ever you want to get an impression of the building from inside, my son actually has created a virtual form of it which you can explore inside.
Oh, like a 3D program on the web. Oh, okay.
Yes.
Where would that be found?
Well, when I'm finding ways of making it available, it could still be completed better. But that gives you the sense of it. I'll briefly describe it. It was, he'd had a group of architects as his students, that he was very impressed by the chapel houses that were attached to cathedrals and so on, which are usually 8-sided, not 9-sided, especially the acoustics and the proportions, and had people look at those. And making a 9, of course, is terrible geometry problems with 9-sided. But
it was 9-sided because it was based on the Enneagram, which was Gurdjieff's.
All the angles, all the ratios come from the Enneagram. And it was aligned to point to where Gurdjieff is buried in Fontainebleau in France. For some reason, I don't ever figured out why this upset Madame de Salzmann and the French group. I don't know why they were so upset. But it's partly because Bennett wanted to open to the world, the people, and said, because Bennett was so straightforwardly honest about things. There's a story about Idries Shah at Bennett, when Bennett was buried, and so he had a reception or something, and Idries Shah was there. And he was saying, yeah, it was what he's sad about Bennett going. He said he's a rare type in this business, he said. He was really innocent.
Oh.
And it was, he had this kind of naivety in him, which was gorgeous, boyishness, this freshness, you see. Something like Shah was a sly old coot, I mean, or younger coot than he was, but he was a sly dog.
But he even called it a business. So
yeah,
yes.
he called it a business. But that was another side, and I go to another story with Gurdjieff. I was lucky one time having odd conversations in person. He said, you know, in the work everybody has their own style. And he said, well, Shah's style is to make fun of the work. That's not my style. And so he went on that. But Bennett, that was one of the great teachings I got from Bennett about style. People treat this in general terms. You can't, if it's real, it's not in general terms. It's got to fit your style. And you're going to do it your way and do it my way. And you say, well, this is subjective. No, I don't care. It's what's in you. It's in your, no, that's your way.
Because if it's your style, it's going to be true to you.
Exactly.
That will show in your presentation.
And you've got to make it your own. You see, it's not, as I see time to time, all this general approaches, and then people don't bring, you know, recognize it, and all this observing yourself. I mean, the real thing is just getting some concrete sense of what you like. And that's got to be brought into the equation. That's what the point of the observation. Beyond a certain point, don't bother about self-observation. It's pointless. But you've got to get what do you like? And people are constantly denying themselves and not being aware of what they're like, and because they're pretending to what they suppose is the virtuous ways or the higher states, and they're ruining their lives because of this. I get so angry about it because they're denying. They say, "Oh, I'm asleep. I'm got negative emotions," and I think, well, that's what you've got.
So you have to work with them.
Right.
Yes.
You can't work with what you haven't got. For God's sake, you're going to buy it at the shop.
Come and get your negative emotions here.
Yes. I know.
You don't have jealousy, we can sell it to you.
Because without these you're not human. And people accept, the stories of Gurdjieff, people, pigs getting to the garden of the Prieure, people go, "Oh, I must not get upset," and Gurdjieff hurtles by swearing and cursing and driving the pigs out, you see. What can you do with that anger, with emotion, you see? And there was this guy, Gurdjieff, like that, and everybody's pussyfooting around being, remembering themselves and all the rest of it.
So it's using that negative emotion when it's needed in the right way. Like,
it's a deep thing, That's another whole other story about that. There's been a lot of things going wrong in the way the stuff's transmitted, as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, so he was so many bits and pieces were hardly addressed, but the upshot, as I say, didn't want to go to Sherborne. He decided at some point after the Shah thing, and he got free of Shah, so really in a sense became his own man for the first time. He was very lacking in self-confidence in many respects, Mr. Bennett. He didn't want to set himself up as he always wanted to say, "I represent Gurdjieff," you see, rather than myself. But eventually it was into life, you say, Gurdjieff says this, but I say that, and it's different. Not the same. So whatever, and it's a complicated story, he came to set up this International Academy for Continuous Education in Gloucestershire, in this place which, like somebody around him just sold their house in Kingston and gave him enough money to pay for it. It was all hand to mouth. It was just incredible. But I thought, oh my God, all this stuff going on, I'm fed up with it, because I have my own problems, my own issues, my own whatever. And so it was a very interesting period for me, because I went down, I did some stuff with the student circuit. He invited down people, and I actually was doing stuff on theatre. That was my thing at the time. I was into theatre. Because the message came through, "Mr. Bennett wants you to go to Sherborne." And I said, "No." Then he did a series of numbers on me, which led to a very, very intimate personal thing with him. And there's those other sides of things you don't know. But it was like I was against my will. I went to Sherborne, and eventually he died, of course, very inconveniently. And he used to say before that, "I'll be more trouble to you when I'm under the sod than I am now." This kind of thing. And so he went and did that, so we landed with it, and all sorts of other things happened. But it was like, I like to tell the stories about him, because not in terms of hagiography, praising him or anything else, just obviously I love the guy, but like Gurdjieff, it drove me crazy at times. I really was. You have to get free of them also at the same time, and that's when you get strong by it, by breaking free of them. But the end of my story was that his teaching in Sherborne was a new exploration for him, a whole new ideas. It sounds abstract on being and will and the world's nature of God, nature of the work itself, and he did these incredible kind of talks, and they were of course transcribed. And so when he died, I thought he was so definite, a definite form, that I undertook then to turn them into books, and I did about 10 books, including the one he was going to write, never got around to writing, based on his talks, called Deeper Man, originally to be called Dig Deeper Man. And I wish I now had kept the title, and I changed it to Deeper Man instead of Dig Deeper Man, because I thought, in the long term that was the better title. That turned out to be one of the most reliable and comprehensive books on the psychology of Gurdjieff, and as Bennett understood it. So that's what I did, and inherited from him, which I've tried to further best I can through my own sort of non-profit, the Diversity, which was really based on the idea of the dramatic university, but it became simply Diversity. These projects, and he had, various fundamental things to do with time, but particularly to do with higher intelligence. So I eventually wrote this book, which is in there, called The Gymnasium of Beliefs and Higher Intelligence, which is still my fulfillment of a connection with him and his project on higher intelligence. Because I'll tell you possibly I make this the final story, and the time's running out. There was one time when it would have been, sort of late 60s, let's say, somewhere around there. He'd come up with very inventive, new kinds of themes and so on to it. The other thing became, and I think it was a definite period it came to him, because there's another backstory I can't go into about this. We must learn to communicate with higher intelligence. Ta-da! Yes, Mr. Bennett. And my story is this, some of my favorite stories, which is partly against myself, but maybe not, maybe it's egotistic. I went, had all these groups, had groups in London, groups that went to Coombe Springs. He was sometimes dealing with hundreds of people, because he was so charismatic. But there's another story about groups and how they can develop and don't develop. Anyway, I had this group, and it was all around the theme of communicating with higher intelligence. And it was in London, Eden Square, somewhere like that, and he came out the corridor afterwards, and he said to me, tell me, so what do you think about all of this? And I said, it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life.
What did he say?
I said, okay. And then, because he never got it, took it badly.
No.
You could say that to him, because, but I knew, in that moment, I was going to use a naughty word, you can't do it on the recording, can you? I was, because by declaring my rejection, I was compelled thereafter to do something about it. It's the people who go along with, the followers, are useless. They're no good at all. Honest to God, no? It's the guys who say, this is crap. There you've got some potential. The guys who say, oh yes, it's very interesting, I really like this, run away, they're not ever going to do anything. It's the old Gurdjieffian thing, no strong affirmation without strong denial. Unless you've got your guts and your passion, as it comes in, now, or resisting, or you cannot build anything. So I've been very saddened over the years, people, sort of read the Nomadic Universe and do his exercises, but it's all like following. So the people who follow can never become, because they're always downstream.
They're always looking to be led as well that way. They can't make themselves go forward and do then the next step.
You go against the stream, it's risky. Gurdjieff said this work is against nature, is against God. So I used to say to people, this work is against Gurdjieff and against Bennett, which is the old thing in Buddhism. If you meet the Buddha on the path, kill him. Don't you know that saying?
No, I don't know that saying.
Oh, that's a strong saying in Buddhism. Don't get caught by the authority figure.
Oh, but if you... Okay, I have to ponder on that one.
You ponder. It's against, this is for me, the more dynamical world. There's somebody who knows the answers, transmitted to these people, and they're going to explain it to the other people, and I think, really? Really? Can it ever be like that? What is this whole thing about waking up and becoming real? Do you think it's according to a manual or a set of rules which you can learn, like going to school?
Like rote.
Like rote, as you say. Like 2 times 2 is 4, or something like this, conscious labor plus intentional suffering equals development of an inner body, and all that stuff. And so it's a problem, you know. But I was with Bennett. I was grateful for meeting a man who had some science in him, because I'm very much a Westerner, and I cavil against, you know, this usual lament you get to the terrible Western materialistic world. I think this terrible Western materialistic world has some of the highest values ever expressed in human history, including, for example, some care about the role of women, which you don't find in any other culture at all.
It's very true, yes.
And I think, and this is insanity. You know, the more I'm aware of it, the more insane it seems to me. I mean, Gurdjieff might have been part of it at all. He always played this role of the patriarch, you know. Gave no role to women in his writings. You see, he did in life in another kind of way, in perhaps a naughty way. But
you mean like there's no women in, for example, Beelzebubs Tales?
Exactly.
Because in meetings there's, I've forgotten how to say her name. You know, I love her, but yes, I suppose it's just the one.
Just the one, and this is, you know, probably his mother, you know, and then in the third series is well, his mother and his wife are mentioned, you know, and that's about it. And it's very strange to me that there it is. But also in the Western world you get some appreciation of free inquiry or democracy, and again in no other culture do you get that. And that's why, you know, the fanatics hate it so much, and want to destroy free speech, you know, subdue women, all that kind of thing. So it's very pressurized. And also the West has become the haven for things for Sufis or Tibetan Buddhists. They're in lands which is not safe for them to be. They can only find their haven in the West. And things of culture, like I have a dear friend now who does dancing, Travis, and in my last event in Nashville she did some Uzbekistan dances in full costume. As she talked about it, she said, in fact, you can't find this stuff in Uzbekistan itself for two reasons. One has been Sovietized in the past, and the younger generation are not interested. If you want to find the real stuff, you go to America.
But then it's like with Turkey, the dancing dervishes disappeared for many decades, didn't they? But
yes, they got banned, and then they came back. But of course that was...
But now it's a tourist thing. It's not for the people or for the esoteric teaching that it was originally doing it or performing for.
But as you say, that's another interesting story, being in the world but not of it, you know, playing roles and what's visible, what's invisible, you know, all these kinds of things. But let me try and think about Bennett and his... It's very interesting, Bennett, he had so much influence on individuals. I mean, I don't give much credence to the groups formed in his name, but constantly I come across people who say, oh, I read Bennett because he's straightforward. You know, he really respects the reader, and all these other people are mystifiers. You know.
I would agree with that. I have quite a few of his books, and they've definitely helped me with my understanding of Gurdjieff.
He lays it out for you. He's not kind of like trying to persuade you. And the way he talked, you know, he actually discussed it once with me. It was very interesting. He was a very, very extraordinary public speaker, extremely articulate, but in two senses. And one was he could be heard, but he took lessons for that, elocution and projection lessons from the voice trainer. But also he could speak in structure. He's the only person I know who actually speaks in sentences, and so the transcriptions are easy from his talks. That he would, you know, he's devoting himself to the audience instead of projecting himself. And he said he doesn't put affect in his voice. You maybe heard talks.
I've heard a couple of his talks.
You see, there's no kind of emotion in his voice, so to speak. But it's not dry. It's not dull, but there's not this emotionality. There's no wish to persuade anybody in his voice. He just lays it out for you, and so it's very, how to say, cleansing in a way. It's very clean what he's doing. He's not like leading you by the nose and using rhetoric. He doesn't use rhetoric at all, hardly. And it just comes from the impeccability of his presentation, and of course, enormous practice, lectures after lectures, you know, weekend after weekend, lunchtime talk, on and on and on and on, this kind of thing.
So he wasn't a man, you know, like sometimes you get people like this that just love their voice. He actually wanted to pass on information.
Oh, absolutely. You know, absolutely. Because he often did it so well, people would just hear him and think, oh, now I completely get that. Then they go away and think, well, what is it I've got?
That's me.
You can't really work it out. But he did so much work. So he was genuinely interested in education and the nature of the mind and learning and all that kind of thing. But that's, see, a research side, I was these days very disappointed in what's labelled under the fourth way. There's hardly also anybody doing any research in it. It's almost as if they got the legacy and they're just flogging the bits and pieces of the legacy. But they ought to be doing something with all of this. With Bennett, you're doing something, you know, creating something, a method, and he developed, you know, all these...
And taking it further.
Taking it further. I mean, use it or lose it. And also I feel very strongly people pick up on some of these ideas, don't do anything with them, and it rots in them, produces a poison. It poisons the mind. If you have something, you can't use it, it just sits there. In my opinion, it decays and poisons your system, your mind. It decreases your mentation. You know, you've got to be able to chew on this stuff.
Because yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, it's just becomes stagnant within you. You've got to keep it going around.
Keep
like,
it going around.
I think Gurdjieff said something like that about laughter, didn't he? You've got to laugh, or it'll turn to poison inside you.
Well, that's well, partly that is yes. The laughter is a release of yes and no together. So, which, as you say, discharges that.
But it must be the same with what you're sort of saying of. If you don't do it, like you're saying, if you don't do it, you lose it. Instead it stagnates and it will poison you instead of moving on with it, or maybe you've become too fixed in your views or something, or you know what you've been taught. So you need to progress with it.
Yeah, yeah. And it all gets flattened out, you know. When I'm dealing with a lot of people, they come with questions like, what is this? And they've got some words from Bennett or Gurdjieff or whatever, and I often just don't reply because it's useless. I know from the start. Because to ask a question, you see, everybody thinks they have a right to ask a question. For them means nothing more than putting a few words together with a question mark on the end. But they haven't done anything in asking the question. Gurdjieff had this phrase, the burning question. It's something which really is a fire in your heart about this. You know, it matters to you like life or death. You know, perhaps you don't have to be quite so dramatic. You've got to, you see, if you ask a real question, it's like your own act, even on the very simple scale, your own act of humbleness in front of the unknown. And you've got to have this genuineness that I don't know and I ask you. You see, and not that. Most people ask questions and they've really got all sorts of ideas and beliefs and they want to get from you something which conforms to what they already have. And that's disaster. You never learn anything from anybody from that. So it's really an opening. Asking a question is an opening, you know, of yourself, and it's incredible in itself, discipline and risky and all the rest of it. So now these, when Ouspensky in his lectures in London, you know, he gives these lectures and very formalized questions and answers afterwards, and the typical thing would be, so we come up with a question, how do I do self-remembering or whatever, and Ouspensky was something formatory next, formatory referring to formatory apparatus, our filing clerk, which doesn't think at all. He just slots bits of information into different files. There's no thinking. So imagine if people were sat through it in those days, they wouldn't do it nowadays. Everybody coming up with these questions, formatory, next.
More explanation.
Until somebody gets there, and you get, you know, I've been on, you know, side of test of it, somebody you, even if they're kind of hardly can put the words together, you know, something genuine there is worth dwelling in, but most people are just wanting confirmation of their beliefs and prejudices. And so...
And then they can carry on as they are.
As they are. So when I don't answer them, somebody, of course, they get very cross with me. Massive. It's not worth it. Which is also saying like they're not worth it, which is an unpleasant thing to say. You've got to say, you know, it's a kind of game or something. You've got to, but you've got to. There's a sort of membership fee. You've got to pay something. You've got to sacrifice something to be part of this game. You know, to be part of it, and it's part of it, and it's just totally extraordinary. This is why I feel frustrated in the people take a narrow way. I was thinking today about Gurdjieff and saying, who that? Don't care about Gurdjieff. People shit on Gurdjieff. It's all these people, of course he's been a contribution, but what's really going on? You know, doesn't have to be put under Gurdjieff's hat or Krishnamurti's hat or Shriner's hat or whatever hat it is. You know, because the thing to do is awaken to the reality of the world, of death, of us as human beings, and that's the thing. If Gurdjieff helps, fine. It doesn't help,
leave it.
Leave it,
yeah.
Go off. Use it, leave it, apply yourself. Find out for yourself. I mean, this terrible world we're living in, you know, and all these enigmas, you know, think inside us, all the inheritance of our problems of our families. Tiny little lifespan.
Which we've got to develop ourselves into, become that acorn that grows into the oak tree.
Yeah, get a seed, yeah, something to grow inside us, to get cooked, and all those sorts of things.
But I find sometimes with Gurdjieff, for people that haven't studied other forms first, maybe whether it's Steiner or Blavatsky or whoever, I think he might not be the first thing to always go to. Like, I think you picked him up when you was young, but you had an inkling, you had that need for something already. Where sometimes for some people I think they need to study all the others so that they can see that Gurdjieff covers everything, where a lot of them only cover one thing or one aspect of everything, where Gurdjieff seems to do a whole of everything in his work.
It reminds me of that phrase that's not used about myself in different contexts. A musician's musician. Because Gurdjieff's never will be at all popular. Because a musician is somebody who speaks to musicians, you see, but not to the general public. And like, you know, this this is going on a side issue for you know, Wim van Dullemen, who is so important in the performance of the movements and the music, and his three first teachers were jazz musicians, you know.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah. He said one of them was absolutely amazing, but to earn a living, he had to be a car park attendant. He couldn't get gigs because the general public couldn't get what he was doing, but the musicians loved him.
Because they understood or saw that he was the next stage on in music.
Musicians. You see, I think Gurdjieff is a bit like this. It's all about, you know, Gurdjieff is about know-how, you know, how to make things work, and Bennett's written about it. He said it's not, you know, people on Gurdjieff's ideas and beliefs and why. He said it doesn't really matter. It's all about how to do things.
Tony, I wanted to ask you, did you ever hear Bennett himself read Beelzebubs Tales? Because he did used to do big sessions, apparently, days on end of reading it out loud, obviously.
Yes, obviously out loud, and I was never there for his marathons, which was 4 hours on and 4 hours off. I mean, it typifies his extreme effort. You know, if he said his tongue was swollen and all the rest of it. But no, I did hear, constantly heard him, so of course I had a wonderful education in how to pronounce some of these weird words of Gurdjieff. And eventually then at Sherborne, he died, I took on the readings of Beelzebub, so I had some practice. And this surfaced many years later when a friend of mine in the States said, why don't you record Beelzebub's Tales? And I first said no, why should I? Then I started doing it, and this was a whole revelation for me about this. And so I have, briefly, I have recorded all of Gurdjieff's writings, extant writings, and also other books like In Search of the Miraculous, Mount Analog by René Delmau, and other books of mystics and the rest of it. But it, again, it was a thread of connection with Bennett to take on these readings, and it taught me something. And taught me something about the interpretation. I'm sorry, I'm going on a bit without. It's so interesting to me. This is a bee in my bonnet. You see people who read things like Beelzebubs Tales, and they read Beelzebubs, and they try to find. They have lectures, as you know, and conferences about what it means. But I've got myself, by and large, more and more disillusioned about explanations of any kind whatsoever. And I suddenly thought, well, something came through doing these readings. I remember the first time I did it was actually in Microsoft Studios in Seattle, quite some time ago. It was 11 o'clock at night. Chapter 1 of Beelzebub.
The arousing of thought.
Arousing of thought was so momentous, you see. And I said, I was absolutely, literally, between the lines was a musical score to do with emphasis and nuance and so on. And that I was reading from this score. And that affected me. I thought, that is the interpretation. So I want to stop ever again, I don't stick to this, ever again explaining anything in Beelzebub, just read it. And in the way it's read is my best meaning of it. You see. So thank you for talking about all of those. And I talked about the projects, with Bennett, with communicating with higher intelligence, and mentioned that book, Gymnasium of Beliefs in Higher Intelligence, which I'm really proud of. It may seem just plain arrogance to say this, but it took me a long time to go through the question and face the question myself. How on earth would I justify writing about higher intelligence? I mean, we've got books around, people gleefully talk about what God says, or what this is, or this reality, right? I can't do this. I'm just only a human being, wondering, speculating. So I had to find the way to do it which could be really authentic, with no claim to superior knowledge. I loathe and detest and hate anybody who claims superior knowledge.
I know what you mean, because where did they get it from? What I know what you mean.
They're using it to assume power over others. And this is wrong. And so, but then you see, if you don't assume superior knowledge, how can you say anything? So I just say, well, I'm having a discourse about how people talk about this, which is all I've done. And so even in my previous book about the Enneagram, there's been people who've latched onto this, produced this system of personalities, and they claim it's some ancient original teaching or something like this. But you get this claim, ancient, special teaching which they've happened to uncover, you see, inventing it, and all sorts of claims have been made for it. It was Christian, it's Sufi, it's Rosicrucian, whatever. Many people are so eager to claim they know the source of it and are in contact with it. And in my book I say none of that. I said, I've read these books and I've thought, this is what I know and can do, and I share this with you. See? But this one, Gurdjieff himself was so guilty of all this. He used the two main marketing methods with its A, it's ancient, B is Eastern, and he exploited these to the hilt. But it's a marketing ploy, you see. You've got to break through all of that, Is this ancient wisdom?
It is a kind of ancient wisdom, and it's something that's being taught, not the Enneagram itself, but the basics of know thyself and attain to be a higher person has been in the philosophies and the various religions for
ever. It's an open
But
question. I mean, it's Bennett, back to him, he was always tried to do his best to find a literal meaning in what Gurdjieff claimed, and he was fascinated by this idea of the Sarmoung monastery and the Sarmoung brotherhood, and it did the research which led eventually to that book, The Masters of Wisdom, which was partly written, and that's another story. He didn't get to write the bits about the modern age in the West, which would have been the most interesting ones, but
Is that because he passed away before
he
he
died,
finished
yes.
it? Right.
He sketched them out, and we thought, this would have been interesting if he lived to do it. That would have been more serious. You see, the older it is and the further away it is, the more you can waffle. But if it's somebody to know, he's like, you see, meetings in a remarkable... I'm going off terribly. Again, I'm so excited about all this. You see. The meetings in remarkable men, and I said, well, they laid it out, these are really special characters. And he defines it in a very high sense. But, come on, it's got to be you and me. Right? You put it in a book, but it's as Joseph Aziz says, that Meeting Remarkable Men is auto-mythology, it's not autobiography. Hardly any of it is factually true.
So these, because some people say these characters are all different aspects of Gurdjieff,
for example,
of what he wanted to be or what he was trying to be.
Yeah, that's the thing. And so there you are, you see. But the Meeting Remarkable Men, for me, the core of it, he doesn't explicitly address it, but he demonstrates it entirely. These characters, whatever they were, did something. They were remarkable, I say, not so much in what they were, but remarkable because they could work together. They were very different and they can work together. For me, that's remarkable. That's what you rarely see in the world. You know, if people could really work together, this world would be transformed. You know, people go on and on about egoism and being free and open-minded and all these generalities, you know, but just working with your neighbour is for me the big thing.
Brings the neighbours together, will make the world a better place.
Well, you do. Working together is not straightforward, and people who, often enough you get people advocating cooperation, working together, and they mean in their way. They don't really allow for difference. And I think the great people in the world now are, they may be dealing with things in politics or religion, whatever. Some are finding the enablement of people of different minds to work together, and that's the true work of the Holy Ghost, how we call it, you know, from the Pentecost. And it came to give the gift of tongues. You see, it is to find the real common speech between people. As people want to jump in to say, oh, let's agree.
People have got different views, so how can we all agree?
How, yes, and you can't just... What are all... You've got to do something in order to get to the point of being able to agree. And part of it entails actually looking at the disagreement and accepting it, because I've worked in dialogue for quite some time, and I see this as people say, of course I know we have different minds, but they don't know it. It takes something to really know it, and I've seen people whose sort of eyes go wide open, and they say, you think differently from me, and they're totally astonished. But they would have said before, of course I know you think differently from me. I am, and I'm open-minded to all these differences, but when it hits you, it's totally different. Perhaps I'll try and make it the final word. We've called this prolonged thing. My favourite lectures of Gurdjieff, actually, not that, was one he called connaissance, which means knowledge or knowing. And he said, what is the object of all this? And da-da-da. He says, to know. And it's interesting. He said many things, of course, and mostly about being, but to know. And I think about that, he said, to truly know anything is extraordinary. It's all this pseudo-knowledge which gets in the way. And there's the going along which gets in the way. To really know something is extraordinary. You know, it's the whole universe becomes alive. You know, it's the story of Gurdjieff. He said, if a man can make shoes, you can talk to him. But you can't talk to an arsehole. No. They don't know nothing about nothing. But he's known. Because why? Because he knows it with his body, his heart, his mind. He knows.
Well, thank you, Tony. It's been a riveting talk. I've enjoyed it immensely. Just one thing, if anyone was interested in your books or your talks, what's your website?
You see, all you need to know is remember my name, Anthony Blake. So it's www.anthonyblake, then you get the .co.uk.
So
I think that's
anthonyblake.co.uk.
with the H in Anthony Blake.
Okay, then well, I'll also write that up on the web bit. Same
I
way
have a major sort of set of archives and stuff in my other website from my non-profit, the Duversity, which you get under, excuse me, DUVERSITY, duversity.org, and they've got a tremendous load of archives on, including I'm putting stuff in one place about you know, the comic book version of the Inner Work and the Gurdjieff Action Man and this kind of thing. You can
one of my favourites is the Gurdjieff Action Man.
Yeah, I bet it would be. All right.
Well, thank you very much, Tony.
Well, thank you.
And thanks everybody for listening. Pleasure. Bye.